what is the current H-1B situation in 2025, then that would be little helpful for our viewers.
Well, I think probably one of the things that we technically don't have a lot of technical changes. So I think we could, what happened was, what was that day? It was just about the end of September. And it was on a Friday. I think it was the September the 26th, I believe it was. And on that day, there was a White House announcement, and like later in the day. And it really wreaked a lot of havoc on because of the way it was interpreted, the way it read. And then there was a lot of panic. A lot of people were afraid that they would have to pay, if they were out of the country, they would have to pay $100,000 to get back in the country. People were changing their flights, they just landed and got the news, and then were trying to pay $1,000 flights to get themselves back into the country. But then on X, the press secretary for the White House on X, a social media platform, announced that no, that's not what they meant, or that's not how we're supposed to interpret what they said. And we're sort of backtracking what was happening. But it really caused so much chaos those couple of days and during the weekend, because there was so much uncertainty. The way it read, it sounded as if you were traveling and wanted to get back in as an H-1B holder, you'd have to pay $100,000. Then they later backtracked and said, no, whatever we're talking about is for the future, in the coming year. But it still caused a lot of uncertainty as to what does that mean? And we're seeing a lot of people like let's say school districts, for example, they're saying, well, what does that mean? Are we going to pay $100,000 per person, or for the school district? Is it employer? Is it per person? And it is still not clear to this day. If you want to share my screen, we can go through a couple of slides. So I'm board certified. I've been practicing, like you said, for a while, and I'm with Powers Law Group. We're a full service immigration law firm. So, honestly, I guess I lost track. It was a week before that. So I've been traveling and at a lot of conferences. There's so many changes. So let's see, okay, the Friday before the one I told you all. So it was September 19th. There was a proclamation that employers had to pay $100,000 for certain H-1Bs, and that it was going to start like that weekend. So it was given like very, very little notice. And then that's what caused so much confusion, because people were afraid that if they were coming back in, they were going to have to pay the $100,000. But then after all of that, they basically backtracked and said, no, what we're talking about is for next year. And so, but we're still unclear. There's been a lot of, this is what they were originally saying, and then this is what they're saying now. But then I think we're still confused is it per individual or is it for the company? But if you are representing a small company that only does maybe one or two applications for H-1B, it's very cost prohibitive to do so. So like you were saying, like this can in effect almost eliminate the ability to do this. If you're a large company that applies for hundreds or if not thousands of H-1B workers, $100,000 is not that big of a deal. It's like a drop in the bucket, and it probably won't change. But if you're talking about each applicant, then this really is going to make companies think twice, and it's really going to take out a lot of the entry-level H-1B type of applicant from this situation. So again, they were basically trying to clarify. They were talking about 2026 and not right now. And for what they're indicating is that it could be per H-1B worker, but it's not exactly clear. And there's also going to be a lot of litigation about this between now and then. But there's very limited guidance on this. So there's another thing that's going on right now too, where they're making some of the consular processing is more difficult because they're making individuals go back to their home country and eliminating or extremely restricting third country visa processing on the non-immigrant and the immigrant side. And in addition to that, we also have the government shutdown,
Yeah.
which has limited the ability for certain things to be processed. And those things are where we're hearing that the consulates could start slowing down and are there, depending on how long the shutdown continues for. And so anyway, these are just some of the I want to go to just basically there's a lot of uncertainty. We're not really sure what's going to happen. But I think one of our biggest takeaways is we need to continue to monitor this to see where they're going. And companies are going to need to make decisions on
Mhm.
do they want to participate with this or not? Do they have the funds for it? And are there alternatives? Now, and I know for the most part, we talk about those alternatives because if the H-1B is not going to work, what are we going to, if they don't win the lottery that first time, then we have to go to another alternative. And so budget planning is what's going to need to be happening. And it could reduce competitiveness and attracting global talent, unfortunately. I think right now TN, well, that's only going to impact Canadians and Mexicans. If we already think about that in the first place, but can we go to an O? Can we go to an L? Even national interest waivers and perms are taking longer than they were before. So even if you have this information right now in October 2025 and you're talking about next year's system, like you might not have a lot of time to put things in order. Like an L, you might be able to, because if you say 1 year and the last 3 years for employment, depending on what you can do. But this is basically what we need to be doing is planning and thinking through what the other takeaway we're telling people is to avoid non-essential travel, just because we don't know what's going to happen again. Is there going to be another last minute, Friday afternoon posting
Yeah.
that's going to put a lot of people, at unease? And so where there's confusion, there's even when there's a lot of last minute decisions like these, um, that do not have a lot of implementation time, this is not ideal because there's so many room for confusion with just reading the letter of the rule, or not the rule. Let me say that again. The way that they're explaining what the change is, and so it can usually what you need is time to have those frequently asked questions, time for there to be more policy guidance. That's why ideally you don't make a change due effective immediately, nor within 48 hours, because and nor on a weekend when the people are not working. And so these are just some of the things to be thinking about: the hiring plans and budgeting, thinking about alternatives, and definitely having an attorney on hand who's monitoring this on a regular basis. And we have a newsletter in English and Spanish and all their social media where we're putting a lot of information out. I think that's like the high level of where we are. If an individual is eligible for an O, or maybe in maybe 6 months or so, because they need to just get their resume in order, or just sort of get into a space to meet those qualifications, or if they're in an E3, you would probably already be going there anyway. A TN, we already talked about that. It only has two nationalities. You can use that. An L, that takes some time and planning to do that. Or it might just be that the individual needs to go work in another location for a while, and sort of write out what's happening here. Or even the perm process is taking longer, national interest waiver, like I mentioned, but maybe in the long run, just hunker down and go that route, so that you don't have to deal with this uncertainty, even if that means you can't be working from the United States during the pendency if you don't have enough time or are not eligible. So we also don't know what's going to be happening with the F1. There was a rule period comment period about the duration of status, and so that's I believe that period has ended already. And what they had proposed to do was to and this impacts OPT, which is why I wanted to bring that up, is that they would only have a certain limit of time instead of duration of status, and like let's say 4 years for a bachelor's, and if you don't complete it, you would have to do an extension
Yeah.
with like I-539. And that can cause some issues in processing and confusion on that as well. But that's more or less where we're at the moment. I think the biggest takeaways are there's uncertainty, lack of clarity. Try to think of other alternatives in the meantime. Try to avoid unnecessary travel and be monitoring like really good resources. Like if you have a private attorney that's representing you, or you're monitoring their social media and newsletter, or a few of them, on like where you're getting your news and late breaking updates. But again, it is very uncharacteristic of the government normally to be doing things so last minute without giving enough time for all of the parties to absorb and take in what the changes are.